Hello, and welcome everyone to our first main session of Global Intrapreneur Week 2025. I'm Dani Elster. I lead the program design and facilitation at the League of Intrapreneurs, and I will be moderating this panel. Sustainability is one of the most used words of our time, but its meaning often depends on where we stand. For some, it's about reducing emissions and protecting biodiversity. For others, it's about fair wages and human dignity. And for others, it's about long-term economic resilience. If we take more of an integral view, the data tell us a mixed story. Environmentally, the CO2 emissions reached a record high last year, and since the 70s, we have lost nearly 70% of the global wildlife population. Economically, the top 10% still holds more than 3/4 of the global wealth. And socially, in 2024, more than 50 million people still lived under conditions of modern slavery. And in the workplace, burnout and inequalities keep rising. Behind this, there's something we are calling the doing enough paradox. And despite the explosion of corporate sustainability reports and regulatory frameworks such as the CSRD, the UN confirms that the progress in nearly half of the Sustainable Development Goals is either minimal or reversing. All of these figures suggest that the sustainability initiatives are rising and multiplying, but the system as a whole still struggles to create the transformation we need. And yet, transformation is possible. We want to give this example. In the 80s, the ozone layer was thinning, and it was a moment where governments, industries, and citizens worked together under the Montreal Protocol. Decades later, the ozone layer is healing. This is a living proof of what happens when we go from fragmented action to true collaboration. So, with us today to explore this topic of sustainability being enough, we have Jolana Amara, CEO of the League of Intrapreneurs. She has a foundation in fine art and design and began her impact career at collectively.org, a sustainably focused media platform incubated by Unilever, which co-launched the 2015 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals with a campaign mobilizing millennials worldwide around purpose-driven action. And as a CEO of the League of Intrapreneurs, she shapes the strategic direction of this global community and supports global organizations in forming internal networks of intrapreneurs. We also have Jessica von Farkas, Head of Ecosystem and Network-Driven Initiatives at B&W Foundation. She's a strategist and ecosystem builder working at the intersection of international collaboration, leadership, and systems change. She designs spaces to bridge between business, philanthropy, and civil society to accelerate collective actions on issues such as climate, energy transition, and social cohesion. With extensive experience in global networks and cross-sectors partnership, she focused on what it takes to move beyond sustainability toward long-term transformation that serves both people and the planet. And we also have Hugh Sidney Jr. He's a senior racial equity program manager at BLab US and Canada. He's a creative strategist, equity architect, and cultural producer working at the intersection of artistry, systems change, and community transformation. With over a decade of global experience, Hughes has led groundbreaking initiatives in North America, Latin America, and the Caribbean to advance racial equity, elevate Black and Indigenous leadership, and reimagine business as a force for liberation. All of them will help us unpack what it truly takes to create systemic change and explore the role of intrapreneurs can play in accelerating action. And I would like to start this conversation by exploring the title itself. Is sustainability enough? So, Jessica, I would love to go with you on what are your thoughts on enough for what?
Thank you, Daniela. That's so beautiful. I have a slight echo. Thank you. It's so beautiful to be here with all of you, to see some familiar faces, but also faces that I haven't seen yet. So it's nice to meet you. and a warm hello from Berlin. To the question on is sustainability enough? When I was reading the title, I had this first instinct to ask the question, enough for whom? Or who is asking the question? And while I don't think we can answer that question here in this call, and there is not like the one question, I love that we actually have youth here, that we have 2 children here on this call. I think that's very telling, because I was thinking to myself, is corporate asking this question? Is the planet asking this question? Is the next generation, is youth asking this question? Marginalized communities that are affected by climate change. So I think it's really important to understand who is asking that question. And at the same time, I would really love to take on a holistic view on that question itself, and also not be really completely negative on it. I think that if we think about the frameworks, and Dani, you were giving some examples, for example, on the ozone layer, I think that mainstream frameworks that I think we can encompass under the broader concept of sustainability have gotten us somewhere. We have made advances. So I think it's also important to recognize that and to celebrate that. However, I do think because of taking often like an isolated, siloed approach to it and not looking at a holistic view of how to address this big question of understanding for whom is it for planetary being, how are we really contributing to this, the progress gets diluted. And I think that's also a huge issue that we're facing. So to make it short towards your question, in my view, I would say, no, it's not enough. I think it got us somewhere. We're seeing backlashes and so on. I think it will get us further if we really embrace a holistic view and a more transversal perspective.
Thank you, Jessie. And I agree. And I love that you add this question for whom. It's really, as we said at the beginning, it also depends the meaning from where you are. So acknowledging that is really important. And Jolana, I would love to hear from your perspective in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. What have we learned from decades of sustainability work inside large organizations? And what would you say are the critical elements that are still missing?
Thank you, Dani, and hello, everyone. So good to see you all. I'm really happy that we are meeting in such wonderful numbers and seeing new friends and old friends at the same time. So to your question, Dani, and I love what you bring in, Jessie, around like who's asking the question and actually questioning the word itself. And when we sort of look at what does it mean, sustainability, right? Where is the word even coming from? We find that it's sort of suggesting that it describes something to hold up or maintain over a period of time. And so I would sort of argue that in its sort of origin already, the word itself is already flawed, because if we have to create systems that we need to then uphold and maintain over time, that it's sort of like a heavy kind of lift already, then itself, it suggests sort of the opposite of what sustainability perhaps should do, right? So I do love the principles that regenerative development brings, for example, because that's sort of suggesting a system that is maintaining itself, that is sort of self-sufficient in a way that contributes to its own sort of function and thriving over time, rather than having to be upheld. And so when to go to your question, Danny, when I look into sort of our experience working with organizations over the past decade or so, what I'm observing is that sustainability departments are often sort of perhaps nice to haves that are sitting, one could say, on the edge of an organization, rather than really becoming or being a strategic advantage or embedded within the organizational structure. And I think that is an opportunity that organizations can really explore and perhaps change, because sustainability, and what, even in its flawed sense, what it can offer to businesses is certainly, it should be a strategic advantage, and for sure a resilience factor, especially in the time that we are living in at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for also bringing the concept of regenerative development. Is something that I see the League also moving towards, seeing as something that could help activate this transformation that is needed. And also connecting to something Jessica brought before, that is considering, acknowledging, and valuing all the things that already happened and existed, not throwing everything as bad, but also integrating that knowledge. And I feel what you're bringing also is seeing what has happened, and then from that evolve. That is more on the regenerative realm, not just delete everything. Thank you for bringing that. And seeing all what's been happening in the last year, in this year specifically, that feels like 5 years in one, internationally. I would love to know, from the more philanthropic perspective you bring, Jessie, on how do you respond to the current pushback against climate initiatives and sustainability efforts, and what's keeping these efforts resilient during challenging times?
Thanks so much for this question. Before I go ahead and answering, I just want to give a little bit of context on the pushback, because I think also it's different region from region. And what we're witnessing a lot in Europe is due to wars, conflicts, geopolitical shifts, for example. There's a lot of narratives right now in the room. And I'm actually curious if it also stays true for other countries. I'm speaking from Berlin, from Germany, around competitiveness, around priorities, like, can we actually afford right now sustainability versus remaining competitive in the short term, and so on. So there's a lot of that in the room. And what we're also seeing is a massive defunding because of that. So I just want to acknowledge also where the pushback is coming from, because it's on the one hand side, of course, market forces, geopolitical reasons, government choices that then also affect, of course, the available capital that is there, for example, for innovations that are taking place to strengthen climate initiatives and sustainability efforts. So we're seeing a lot of that in different sectors across Europe at the moment. And what I witness, which is powerful, for example, from a philanthropic perspective, is twofold. I think one, the choices around initiatives that you can also launch, that you can strengthen, that you can do in terms of collaboration with others. So speaking for the BMW Foundation, for example, we just launched 2 weeks ago a new format which is supporting scale-up, not anymore startups, but basically scale-ups that are really at the point of coming into the market readiness with initiatives around sustainability, and bridging them, for example, also with other multilateral players such as the International Finance Coalition, the IFC, or also with other players in policy and so on, to really strengthen the ecosystem and not step back, but actually double down and see how we can really strengthen these different multi-sectoral coalitions and partnerships and initiatives, also what leverage we have as foundations. On the other hand side, I think it's really, really key right now. And I'm very excited because in 2 weeks, we will be in Johannesburg with the G20, for example, to understand the different multilateral platforms that are also available, and which I see philanthropy now stepping more and more in. So while the G20 usually is more like a government-run platform for economic, social affairs, we see more and more different actors basically organizing around it. So there's the business 20, there's the women 20, urban 20, social 20, the foundations platform. And we're really trying to find actively also actors that are with us and understand how can we, I want to say, hack the system and keep the climate agenda and keep the sustainability agenda also in partnerships and on these big global agendas, basically, because we all know that next year G20 will be hosted by the United States. And we also are very aware that probably climate and sustainability are going to disappear from the public agenda, but we do need to understand how do we leverage different fora that will remain and will persist. And that's also where I would love to make the point towards resilience. How can you also sometimes kind of understand institutionally with whom to align and with whom to collaborate, so you can continue the work and it doesn't stop, even if in the moment maybe it doesn't have the high visibility in the public sphere, no? One last point on that is that I do think we need to understand how we reimagine also these spaces and systems together. And the last point on this one is the trust-based relationships. I can never stop emphasizing that enough. The trust-based infrastructure is really always key. And it's always key to have these honest, open conversations with partners, with other actors, to say, how can we support each other. We as foundation are not the policy player, but we do collaborate with other organizations that do have the knowledge, the institutional positioning also in the system to make these recommendations towards governments and so on. So I leave it there. I hope that gives a little bit of a flavor of what philanthropy can also do in that space.
Thank you. And I have to say that by seeing your smile and sharing all of that, it creates hope, because I also feel the League is connected to that, and seeing that as an opportunity, as an invitation, you know, to step into. So yeah, it brings.
Gandhi, I would say one more thing, sorry to step in. I think because the last presidency of the G20 was also hosted by Indonesia, India, Brazil, and now South Africa. So I think it's also a pivotal moment for organizations that work globally, that also work nationally, locally, to understand how do we make sure that the momentum that was created by these countries and presidencies remains when now the G20 also returns, for example, to the United States, to the UK, and that we don't repeat mistakes that we have done before, and that basically the momentum that was created by many actors can persist. So just wanted to also acknowledge that, because I think there's a lot happening right now in terms of geopolitics and so on. And I think we need to be smarter at it and really understand how we can play this game in a much better way for everyone.
For sure. And again, I feel these questions you're bringing in this house are really good invitations, more than scary. It's open the door for an opportunity, for possibilities, for potential to act together and to build and develop that resilience, right? And before giving the voice to Hughes, I would love to come back to Jolana for a second, of this that you were bringing of isolated efforts. You know, that I wanted to ask you if you have seen that the efforts on sustainability have become increasingly more isolated in large organizations, and how do you think that affects our ability to drive meaningful change?
Thank you. I don't know if I would say increasingly more isolated, because I think organizational structures are sort of by default designed to be in sort of fragmented and in silos. And I don't want to necessarily only criticize it. I think that it's important for efficiency that you sort of the divide and conquer sort of model, right? So you focus and you can deliver. But it has its sort of disadvantages for sure. And what I'm observing, especially working with organizations where typically we come sort of through the sustainability departments or the impact departments, sometimes through HRs, is that often sort of we started to do what we call the ecosystem mapping, impact ecosystem mapping. And what we find is that often organizations, you know, there are sort of impact and sustainability efforts across the organization, not necessarily only in the sustainability department, but because of the fragmentation of the siloed environments, what often happens is that the transparency disappears and visibility disappears, and some of the efforts end up being also duplicated. And opportunities in collaborating even within one's own organization are sort of missed because of the nature of the siloed environment. So yeah, so I kind of, I guess if I bring the sort of the work of the League and the Intrapreneurs into it, research shows, for example, that only 10% of your employee force needs to be entrepreneurial for organization to really start seeing sort of some impact within the innovation in sustainability field. And so if you think of it, Intrapreneurs in this way could really play a role of sort of those bridge makers between these departments, and to make sure that these efforts and that are often being duplicated are really more so connected and working in collaboration with each other. So what we've been focusing on lately is sort of helping organizations create entrepreneurial networks within, so that we can bring sort of these different players who are already innovating inside organizations and bring in sustainability across the board. So it doesn't have to be that structure completely changes and suddenly you become decentralized, or I don't know, different structure where silos don't exist anymore, but perhaps just creating a system that touches horizontally across the board.
I really like the concept of bridge makers. it's a good image to have. Maybe change makers sometimes can be too abstract of what that change is, but bridge makers is more concrete for me. It's more specific, and yeah, connecting and more of a specific attribute of an entrepreneur in a way. And this fragmentation you're bringing, I was pointing to that in the introduction. The fragmentation we have in the understanding of the concept itself is fragmented, but from what you're bringing, also the fragmentation is in the functional part, in how it's activated, in how it's like bring it to life. So it's a fragmentation in different levels of what sustainability is. And Hughes, from your work with B Corps, how do you see the relationship between sustainability metrics and actual community impact? And are companies translating their numbers into real world change?
Thank you for the question, Danny. Before I jump into the response, just wanted to say thank you all for joining me today. I'm calling in from the Lenape land, aka Brooklyn, New York. I wanted to take that time to honor them, especially on this topic that we're talking about. To be very honest with you, what you're asking, Danny, is metrics that are really moving the needle and really having an impact and meaning. And quite frankly, what we've seen is many companies excel at measuring output, right? Whether it's a reduction of CO2, dollars donated, a diversity percentage reported, but that doesn't always translate into lived change for communities, right? And what do I mean by that is the real question is whether those numbers move us closer to collective well-being. At B-Lab US and Canada, we've been working to bridge that gap by connecting climate action, shout out to Kylie, who I see is on the call, who leads our climate justice work, directly to racial equity. And for example, this year, we've partnered both the racial equity team and the climate justice team to develop a really robust learning journey program that encompassed various modules that really shows what does this look like in an application format? What does this actually look like in partnership with communities? And throughout the program, we reference one of the most amazing initiatives that Kylie and her team has been leading, which is the 7 Principles for Partnership with Frontline and Impacted Communities, as a guiding framework, particularly around how companies can build trust-based relationships and share power when engaging with communities most affected by climate disruption. I'll give you some key examples. For example, 2 of those principles, one of them centers local wisdom and perspective to commit equitable resources and allocation, helping participants to see how authentic partnerships requires listening first and resourcing communities equitably, not imposing external solutions. And what we've learned from that was that when companies move from compliance-driven sustainability metrics to relationship-driven accountability, impact shifts from, impact shifts from being performative to transformative. And that's when sustainability becomes regeneration, right? So it's really about building relationships with these communities, understanding how we integrate them into the co-collaborative process. And what we're also starting to see is that metrics tells us what's happening, but communities tells us whether it matters or not. And those community voices need to be part of the solution in order for us to see that collective movement happen in the direction that we're envisioning.
Thank you, Hughes. And I'm starting to see a pattern also in these questions and answers of the building of trust, the relationships, the bridges. It's something that is coming on as a common answer to this topic. And accountability, I think this concept you brought now is also super important in the role we're navigating. I've heard you before in other conversations talking about the importance of frontline communities in sustainability. And how do you think Intrapreneurs can help bring these voices into corporate sustainability efforts?
Honestly, I think it's first and foremost understanding the why, right? Why do you want to bring this back to your company? What is the purpose and what do you envision that translating to, right? So being real with yourself, being real with where your company's at. Espera, deixa o papai terminar essa resposta. Sorry. So for me, when I say frontline communities, we're specifically highlighting Indigenous, Black, and Global South voices in a way that often feel, the impact of unsustainable systems, yet they are the last to be consulted, right? So entrepreneurs can bridge, and I loved how you mentioned the bridge makers, right, versus the change makers, because they can bridge this by co-creating with communities and not designing it for them, but having them be part of that process, which means essentially shifting from extractive storytelling to equitable partnership, where communities define success and corporation act as enablers, right? So for example, at BLab, for example, we're embedding community consultation into certification on the JEDI standards, right? So that is actually now one of the options you can select from in order for companies to be able to engage with frontline communities. So this has now been integrated into our assessment in a way that really provides a clear pathway forward in how companies can interact with communities in a very safe way without causing any additional harm. And so when regeneration starts with those most impacted, you start to see those solutions once those co-authors are part of the development of the project and initiative.
I'm hearing in all of that the relevance of listening, like now having a shift on that, who are we listening to and how are we listening to? So maybe that's something to connect with everything we've been building on. The sustainability part is as a key skill to harvest and harness, the how to listen. And coming back to you, Jelena, with the concept of bridge makers, how do you think entrepreneurs can play that role effectively?
That's a great question, and we have some really incredible entrepreneurs in the room today. Shout out to all of you as well. I see entrepreneurs as people who don't see or don't view the world just as it is, but as it could be. And then just applying their whole being to making sure that they can get there, or at least setting up sort of pathways to getting to that type of world. And so in a sense, entrepreneurs don't just sort of like fix things, and it's not just sort of like a fixer-upper kind of skill, but they add an incredible value to their organizations. And so when we talk sort of about the skills and mindset, I think firstly, I would encourage anyone who sort of has an organizational power to create an environment that nurtures and supports entrepreneurs. Very important, because the work is incredibly hard, and it can be even harder if the entrepreneurs have to sort of, I suppose, innovate or create those pathways towards the world that they can see as possibility when it goes against the grain of the organization. So having even small hubs inside large organizations where, the small group of the 10% or even less of entrepreneurs can innovate, prototype, support each other, could make a huge difference. And then when it comes to the actual skills of the individuals, of the entrepreneurs, here I love that trust has come as a sort of a repeating theme throughout this conversation. And so, if we can create enabling environments and create sort of communities or networks of entrepreneurs within organizations, that sort of nurtures trust and builds those relationships and connections across the organizations. And trust, in my sort of perspective, my point of view, trust helps us nurture empathy. And empathy is I think, a skill that is not being spoken as often as, for example, I don't know, pitching and storytelling, but is equally as important, because that's where the fire of the entrepreneur comes from, right? Being able to empathize and feel and understand what is happening out in the world and what are the needs that need to be addressed within the world. And then storytelling, I mentioned storytelling as something that is not important, but of course it is important, because then being able to communicate, once someone empathizes with the stories of those in need, is very important and can really make a stride inside of an organization, because then we can communicate, the idea that we have that can solve something, can create the pathway towards the world that we see as the possibility. Building collaborations and partnerships, bringing people along the way is very important. So that is, again, where storytelling can come in handy. And drawing in together communities, like the networks, even so, if there is no formal structure that the organization that you're working from is sort of nurturing, where you as an entrepreneur can thrive, then build it yourself. You know, go out there and find those other entrepreneurs inside of your organization, or even outside of the organization, or communities like the League. I guess that's where we come handy, because we bring entrepreneurs together. But how important that is something that I hear again and again, you know, especially when things become harder for entrepreneurs, that having that community of support, you know, even just, you know, listening ear that totally understands what you're going through, you know, fighting for something, for the green light inside of the organization. And something that we are sort of talking about a lot, especially since I suppose I'll bring the Action Fellowship here, because Action Fellowship is an initiative that we are sort of bringing as a new fellowship of the League of Intrapreneurs, and I don't know, maybe we are going into it a little bit later in the conversation, but the idea is that we create networks, also external networks of intrapreneurs, right? So that we can sort of look into also how the global transfers into the local. And I think this is a skill that we haven't talked enough about in terms of entrepreneurial capacities, like really being able to translate your global organizational focus and efforts into the environment that is where you are, into the local. And I do think that local is kind of like, we could say that the local is the new global, really, in a sense, where if we just take a few years ago during COVID, how important it was for the resilience of local communities that we were sufficient, self-sufficient and sustainable. And so, yeah, I think thinking about it this way, local in this context could complete the sort of global connections and complement them.
Thank you for a very complete answer to that question. And I just wanted to add on the empathy part that I feel is absolutely important, and it's also connected to something that comes from the regenerative development part that is key to this transformation, that is to increase our capacity to care. And I feel that's part of the bridge, like you will sustain in a way your capacity to continue the work if you have a deep care for what you're doing and what you're bringing to life. And you already mentioned Action Fellowship, so I want to just double click and go deeper now on that. The League has been around for 10 years and has worked with many different organizations, large organizations, and from last year also going into specific themes of climate, of equity, of technology. And now Action Fellowship feels like the evolution also for the League. So Jolana, could you take us through a journey, like what's behind it? What does it mean? What would it look like? The Action Fellowship of 2026.
Thank you, Danny. And I'm sorry if I messed the order of thoughts that we sort of wanted to address. Well, the nexus of climate, equity, and tech comes essentially from the translation of people, planet, and technology, right? So the sort of foundation or basics of what we should sort of be supporting in order to, I guess, support the systems change in a world that seems increasingly divisive and fragmented. And so bringing that together in a way is the idea is really that we built on the trusted relationships that we have built as a community of intrapreneurs, and move together towards collective action at the intersection of these three topics. And we are going to be sort of bringing together 50 intrapreneurs early next year, the first week of May, to start this journey of 9 months together, where hopefully by the end of the in-person convening, which will happen in Greece, we will be able to say, or well, rather than say, to kind of, yeah, have come up with some groups within these 50 entrepreneurs that will have ideas on what they want to work on together, whether that is a very specific project or just keep on having conversation on very specific topic. The world is our oyster, and we are entering into very much an emergent space. And I'm very, very happy that this is actually the team that the four of us are leading this initiative together. And I don't know, maybe I'll invite you all to perhaps also say a few words.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. And now it feels like Action Fellowship will be the playground for bridge makers, in a way, you know. And Jesse, from Action Fellowship, this intersection of climate equity and technology, how do you think it creates new opportunity for systems change?
Well, I'm so excited to see it coming together, you know, because Jelana was already mentioning the intersection, the natural intersection of these topics. And I think to most of us also here in the room, the dependencies of these agendas are so clear, no? Like if we think about tech, for example, and all the good that it's doing, the development, I'm not right now speaking about the challenging part, but I'm speaking about the opportunities. We also know that there's a huge carbon CO2 cost, for example, on it. Now we have massive questions around AI. How can we sustain that? So it really also helps us to actually meet our climate agendas and support the planetary well-being and not disrupt it in a negative way even further. New jobs being created, accessibility, job creation, talents that are skills that are being developed, so that also this transformation is equitable. There are so many different agendas connected to it. And I think and I just touched upon a very small part of this prisma, basically, if you look at it from different angles. What I often notice is in spaces where we have, for example, conversations around tech, you find the tech ecosystem. You go to climate, you find, depending also on the topic setting and so on, you find a certain community also on it. The same goes for equity, right? And so often when we have a few leaders that are cross-pollinating these spaces, it's like, oh, we should have much more of that because there's so much interdependency. We would be so much more successful. We know we touch already a little bit upon those topics, for example, but we would do much more because it would make our efforts so much more efficient and successful. So I think that the Action Fellowship is a really bold bet to say, how can we design spaces so that this collective wisdom can really come together and can also articulate into collective action. So we're really excited to see how leaders that probably are spending most of their time maybe thinking about one of these agendas or maybe two can find complementary ways of not only increasing their individual potential as bridge makers. I will adopt this language in big institutions, but how can we also create a very positive mycelium together, if we want to say, for these different agendas to create good for people and for planet. So on that intersection, I'm really happy to be part of a team. And I really look here at everyone that is on this call also for your inputs and for your ideas and contributions, how you see that it would be valuable when we bring these different ecosystems together and really also think about an articulation into action. I think I love this evolution that the League is also taking for this fellowship.
Thank you, Jessie. And for the ones who don't know, mycelium, that is one of my favorite words, is this network that is under the soil, connecting through fungi, all different beings, in giving information, nutrients, and mutual reciprocal relationships, you know, that I feel that the analogy with a human mycelium is so beautiful and so needed. So thank you for bringing that word to this conversation. And Hughes, we've been talking about this role of bridge makers for intrapreneurs, but if we could go more specific, what do you think is the role that intrapreneurs can play in maintaining momentum and fostering collaboration across sectors?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And again, a huge shout out to this initiative, the Action Ship Fellowship, because the reality is, I've seen several initiatives. Sorry. I've seen several initiatives that have the right intent, but really don't have the right infrastructure, right? And what I see is that the entrepreneurs are the connective tissue within across systems, right? So the ones who translate vision into lived action. And also momentum isn't sustained by one organization. It's really by a community of practice. So what this really does, it's really a timely program that creates space for all sorts of bridge change makers, right? I kind of brought both of those words together. That again encompasses companies, civil and creative leaders to co-design regenerative solutions. It's just not another program. It's really a trust infrastructure for systemic collaboration. And what I'm really excited for is to see how do we continue to build on this? This is really the first iteration, and our goal is to really learn from the community in a very holistic way that really adds value to not just the fellowship, but how we bring that back to our ecosystem, to our communities, to our organizations, and then really translate that into collective action. And so being part of the co-creative aspect of it, it's really an honor to see, all of the different ways that it's coming together. And it's exciting to see the different bridge makers, change makers, leaders really coming in and adding value in that regard. So I'm excited, and I'm really looking forward to learning from the community in a way that allows us to really propel this forward.
I really like the concepts that are connecting now with this, like connective tissue, so trust infrastructure, how beautiful. I really resonate with this type of vocabulary, of language, building Action Fellowship, and not just like a standard, because I feel also language either supports the current system or help us move towards a different one.
In fact,
So,
if I may add just a bit, it's exactly true. Like, I know even with us creating this, we are very intentional around language, right? Because language is part of what keeps previous and old traditional systems together, and deconstructing the language and implementing the language that is inclusive, that is the connective tissue, that incorporates all voices, really dismantles, right? So when we're thinking about decolonization and when we're thinking about programs, what that really entails is not just the content of the program, but the vernacular of the program, how we step into space and the way we curate the actual experience. It's not just going straight into the action, but these are human beings, behind the action. And we carry a lot, as Jesse mentioned earlier on, there's so much shifts happening geopolitically speaking that people are carrying different weight and pressure. And, all of that oftentimes is tied to our careers and our choices, and so really being able to focus on our language and really deconstructing that, I think, is a huge step in the right direction. So I did want to hone in a bit more on there because, that's fully intentional.
agree. I couldn't agree more with that. And also that from what you're bringing, and Jessica and Jolana, like this Action Fellowship is a living project. It's something that also help us recognize ourselves as nature too, that we are humans and humans are nature, and how that also translates into corporate or organizational behavior, and kind of building that systems from there, not from what we think it could be, but tapping into other type of intelligence too. And it's a living project, because it's not like we gather one time, we leave, and then good luck. We thought that it has to be building on the emergence that Jolana was bringing, like what's happening, what is needed, what are we being called to, in what way, with what language. And I think all of these questions are very, very super alive for at least the team, and for what we want others to jump on board with us to this bold journey. And as a last question that I would like the three of you answer from your perspective is something we have been answering in between all the other answers, but what would you think are the specific skills and mindset that entrepreneurs need to develop this and lead this work? We have talked about trust, we have talked about listening, we have talked about empathy and care, but yeah, more on that mindset, more on that culture, or that like worldview needed for this work and to lead with this work. So maybe Hughes, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think it's a culmination of everything we've said thus far, but to really kind of refine it, it's really always keeping that purpose, that why at the front of your mind, right? Because often we've seen people get burnt out. We've seen people, go into a different direction from where they started. And so, I would say that mindset entails really continuously taking learning journeys, really dismantling ways that it's still the old system still shows up within you. Hold yourself accountable in moments that um, lessons are being um, not just taught, but like it's being observed, right? I think often we get into this notion that, oh, we've learned enough and I've took enough courses and I'm woke enough and I know what I'm saying and I know what I'm doing. And the reality is that, we're learning each day. And so really having this continued desire to learn, to unlearn, to being in community with folks who are really at the core of the movement, and that entails, again, frontline communities, different key stakeholders, um, looking at different ways to build trust through different initiatives that incorporates these voices, really being able to have your leadership show in a way that is collectively bridging versus separating, and not operating in silos. And I would also say operate from love. I think the one word we haven't heard throughout this entire thing is love, right? And I think the world needs a whole lot more of it right now. And so really operating from love, a place of grace, um, understanding that humanity is a responsibility that we all carry, and how we step into that, defines our legacy. And so it's beyond, just trying to see these changes from a corporate or from a community level. It's our planet, it's our people. It's bigger and it's more holistic when we think about it. And so, that mindset for me comes with finding balance. So centering joy with those communities, developing an actual relationship with these communities, not just tapping into them when we want to develop something, learn from them, allow that to resonate within us. And I think that mindset, that forward thinking, allows a lot of this work to move a lot faster and seamlessly.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. And yes, how we didn't mention love before. You're so right. Thank you. Jessie, what's for you?
You know that game where you do tell a story and basically you go to the word that another person said and then you continue the story. So I will continue with love, because that was where I was making my full dot on the qualities, of what we as entrepreneurs need to move forward. I would love to go to some Buddhist principles and bring them in here as well, because the qualities that came to my mind were signlessness, mudding, and compassion. And that's with compassion, I go back to Hugh's, starting with the love piece, basically. But the signlessness is a very interesting word that I came across recently. And it's basically the capacity when you look at a tree and you look at the cycle of a tree, basically. A tree is growing, fruits and the leaves and everything. And then at some point it becomes fall and it has to let go of all the leaves and everything. And it does that without questioning whether the leaves will come back next year. It just does it, like it's the purpose of a tree. And I would really love to go back to what Hughes was sharing in terms of love and joy, like our capacity to love, to be in connection. What does that mean for us when we do what we as humans are kind of here also to do, no? And I believe that often there's also this kind of concept of when I do this, I will reach this point and so on. So I think there is a balance between striking the chord of being tactical and strategic. Yes, absolutely. But at the same time, I do believe we have to continue doing the things that come from places of love, that come from places from compassion, that come from a place of connection, even if all the signs are telling us differently, that we have to do something different because the world is looking really dark and it's a really bad place. I do believe we have to hold on to that and think about, what am I, what is my purpose here, and how do I continue doing that? Not knowing if the tree will grow the leaf next year. We don't know that. And it's very sad and actually heavy to say that out loud, but at the same time doing it anyways, no? And then coming to that next point for me is also the point of mudding. It's another concept that I came across recently, is basically that where there is lotus, there's also mud, and there's no lotus without mud. Sometimes we really need to go into the state of mudding as well. And it's as important as the shiny, beautiful flower that we see. And I feel in the process that we're going through, like how we transform basically to all the loss and the grief and everything that we're witnessing also that are connected in the systems work that we're doing as entrepreneurs. When do we know what it looks like also to hold space for that and to hold space for regeneration, be it collectively, but also be it individually, and allow ourselves, I think that has to do a lot with compassion, allow ourselves to be compassionate. And sometimes the best that we can do, even if it sounds counterintuitive, is actually reflecting on what mudding looks for us individually, to then be able, and we will always stay in connection. It doesn't mean that we step out of the system, but I do think that is really, really important also for entrepreneurs. I come back to love and compassion because I do want to say there is this piece, of course, on action. And I think at the same time, it's a balance between being and action. And I would love to bring both basically in here as qualities for entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Jessie. And what I'm hearing from your sharing is honoring cycles. You know, from the tree story, from the mud story, from where we are now, is really
Exactly.
first being conscious and aware of those cycles and then honoring them. Sometimes we need to
Absolutely.
compose, sometimes we need to rest, sometimes we need to act.
Yeah.
You know?
And allowing ourselves to feel all the feelings. We can be in love with what we're doing, with the
Yeah.
projects that we're doing. It doesn't mean that this will always stay the same way. We have to be able to let go and go with these cycles. So thank you for encapsulating that so beautifully, Dani.
Yeah, that's true too. And I do want to say to your point, Jesse, you know, one thing that we've elevated in the programs we've developed at B Lab is you need to sit with all of the feelings, right? Like this is not going to be a kumbaya, you know, like it's all going to feel great or linear, you know, as you're going through this. It's going to be muddy, you know, it's going to be frustrating. There's going to be anger. There's going to be sadness, right? But if you're doing it in community, you get through that. Right. And that light at the end of the tunnel starts to seem a bit more closer and clearer. So embody all of those emotions and feelings. It's like life, right? Life is not going to be all bubbles and giggles and joy. Like you have to have the ebbs, you have to have the flows. And hopefully where we end up as a community is at a place where we all can be happy with it, knowing that we've done our part.
Thank you, Hughes. And Jolana, what is your take on this question?
I love where it has taken us, really, so that I love also that Hughes, that you brought in the dismantling, you know, and it kind of, to me, when I'm thinking of dismantling, it brings me to listening and then to building, right? And I'm thinking like building what? Building connections, right? Which is kind of what keeps coming through this conversation. And so maybe a controversial sort of thought, but I think that the planet will be okay. Regardless of what we do to the planet, it will always be okay. It will find its way. You can see sort of, for example, what happened after Chernobyl, right? Like now the planet is taking over, like nature is growing over and it's regenerating itself. But the root cause, the root problem that we are facing here is us, is humanity, is society, is our community, the loss of trust, the loss of connection, right? And so, you know, I think, yeah, going just back to the grow, like nurturing, growing, and being intentional about deepening our empathy, our ability to care and understand each other, the ability to also hold each other in disagreement. I love the you know, what Bayo Akumulof, I talk about it a lot, what he sort of suggests with the concept of whiteness or polyontology. Sort of holding the polarities as truth at the same time, you know, so that we don't have to convince each other. We just need to make sure that we build the connection and that we nurture that connection between each other. It doesn't have to be, you know, complete agreement on everything amongst us, but the connection is that needs to stay strong. And so I love that this is I don't know if I'm making sense here, but it's sort of, the idea of the action fellowship is the nurturing of that connection between each other, between us, but also organizationally, systemically. How can we bring organizations together, or different sectors together in a way where we start building that trust and we start building that connection that then can lead to collective action. And hopefully that then means that we are moving needle on those huge issues that we are facing today. And that doesn't have to be, moving it to the sort of commercial competitiveness, but starting with just those small, low-hanging fruits of what are the challenges that we are all facing together. Could we solve them together by coming together or bringing together a few people and just thinking about them as collective? And so I'll I think
Thank you. And it does make sense for sure. So thank you for sharing that. We are right on time. We don't have enough time for questions, but we will have another session about Action Fellowship on the 27th of November at 5 p.m. CET. And that will be a session that the title for that one is Why Collective Action, Why Now, and Why Us? So the four of us will be there again, kind of going deeper and more personal about this journey. So if you had any questions, I will invite you to that, and also share on any of our social media platforms. But I wanted to finish also saying 3 components that I would like to bring into what is required. And one is engaging our right brain more than the left brain, being conscious about that. And then 2 more ingredients to this equation I would feel is awe and wonder. I think they're very key components to open that door from all of this, connected, of course, with joy, with compassion, with love, and everything. And to close this session, first, thank to Jolana, to Jessica, and to Hughes, and to everyone here for giving us your attention, your precious attention and time. Hope this sparks some new thoughts and feelings in you. And to finish, I would like to share some concept and notes that I feel collect the essence of this conversation. Hope, resilience, integration, holistic, trust, care, empathy, intersection, collaboration, relationships, mycelium, connection, tissue, connective tissue, trust infrastructure, silence, love, mudding, joy, cycles, purpose, honoring, feelings, agreements, holding, and nurturing. So thank you, everyone. And I invite you to connect to the other GIW sessions. In an hour, we have the dilemma of money with Stuart that is here present. So thank you for being here. Tomorrow, we have 3 incredible sessions. One about navigating complexity, the Q&A with Maggie, one of our mentors, and then The Earth is in the Boardroom Now. And then on Thursday, we will have another Q&A session with mentors, and the other panel that I'm very excited about that is called a Collective Imagination Lab, where I will be participating also from my regenerative hat. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here, and looking forward to connecting with you again. Thank you.
Thank you
Jessie.
all. Thank you, Dani.
Thank you, everyone.
For the amazing
Thank you, Dani.
facilitation.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
See you all soon. Take care.